Seattle gets rain on almost 40% of the days in a year. That is somewhere between 37 and 39 inches of it annually, spread across roughly 148 to 150 separate rainy days. So if you're picturing a dreamy little tiny house with a cute shed roof and a few windows, I need you to stop right there, because that design will rot from the inside out in about 18 months up here. Today, I am showing you 10 tiny homes that were actually engineered to survive the Pacific Northwest, with real builder names and real 2026 pricing. And by the end of this video, you're going to know exactly which roof pitch, which siding, and which single ventilation system separates a beautiful tiny house from a moldy, moisture-soaked disaster. Before we get into it, hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell. We post a brand new tiny home breakdown every single week. Real builders, real pricing, zero sponsored fluff. And if you're even thinking about downsizing anywhere near the Puget Sound, this channel is about to save you tens of thousands of dollars in repair costs. Now, let's get into it. Quick heads up before we start counting these down. Home number 7 on this list uses a ventilation trick that most builders outside of Washington have never even heard of, and it is the single biggest reason some tiny homes here last 30 years while others start smelling like a wet basement in year 2. Stick with me, because I'm breaking down exactly how it works. Let's start with a company that builds specifically for this climate. Mount Baker Tiny Homes is based right here in Western Washington, and their flagship model, the Pacifica, is basically a masterclass in rainproofing without sacrificing style. It is an 8-foot by 24-foot layout, and the roof is a steep pitch standing seam metal design, which matters more than people realize because a steep pitch sheds water fast instead of letting it pool and find its way under shingles. Inside, they use sandy wood and Montana ghostwood finishes, which give the interior a warm, high-end cabin feel while resisting the humidity swings that cheaper laminate interiors cannot handle. Climate control comes from a mini-split heat pump system, which heats and cools efficiently without the ductwork that could trap moisture over time. The whole thing is wrapped in floor-to-ceiling daylighting, which sounds like a style choice, but up here it is functional too, because Seattle only gets somewhere around 2,100 to 2,170 sunlight hours a year, so every home on this list needs to fight for natural light in the design itself. Base pricing on the Pacifica typically starts in the $85,000 to $98,000 range, depending on finish level, which puts it solidly in the mid-tier for a fully custom, climate-engineered build. Seattle Tiny Homes operates out of Buckley, sitting right off Highway 410 at the foot of Mount Rainier, about as Pacific Northwest as a zip code can get. What makes them stand out on this list is certification. Their builds carry ANSI, a 119.2 for travel trailers, ANSI, a 119.5 for park models, and modular housing certification too, which means an independent inspector has actually verified the moisture management systems, not just taken the builder's word for it. That certification also makes financing and legal placement dramatically easier in Washington, since insurers and lenders trust a stamped, inspected build far more than a garage-built one-off. Their homes use proper rain protection detailing at every roof to wall transition, which is exactly where most amateur builds fail first, and is the kind of detail you only notice once it has already failed on someone else's house. Up in Bellingham, near the Canadian border, West Coast Homes builds tiny houses and park models that compete with traditional stick-built construction on quality, and it shows in the wall assembly. They use a commercial-grade rainscreen system, which is a small but critical detail. Instead of nailing siding directly against the house wrap, there is a ventilated air gap behind the cladding. That gap lets any water that gets past the siding drain and dry out instead of sitting against the sheathing and slowly rotting it. It is a technique borrowed straight from high-end coastal architecture, and honestly, any tiny home going up in a market with this much annual rain that skips a rain screen is cutting a corner that will cost the owner later. Because of the modular grade construction and the park model chassis options, West Coast Homes starts higher than most builders on this list, typically north of $135,000, which reflects the heavier, more permanent build quality. Green Pod, based in Port Townsend, takes a slightly different angle. Their focus is high efficiency, sustainable modular construction built around indoor air quality, which becomes a serious issue in a climate this wet, because a tightly sealed, well-insulated tiny home can trap humidity just as easily as it keeps out cold. Their builds pair high our value insulation with an integrated heat recovery ventilator, commonly called an HRV, which continuously exchanges stale, moist indoor air for fresh outdoor air without losing the heat you already paid to generate. It is the difference between a tiny home that feels stuffy and damp by February and one that stays dry and comfortable through an entire Seattle winter. And it is one of the clearest examples on this list of a builder designing around the climate instead of just around square footage. Clever Tiny Homes builds ANSI 119.5 certified park models and movable tiny houses that are registered through the DMV, which opens up placement options a standard tiny home on wheels does not always get. Engineering-wise, this is one of the more overbuilt options on our list, meeting or exceeding Washington's own inspection standards rather than just squeaking by. For a rainy climate, that matters at the foundation level specifically, since park models typically sit on a more permanent, engineered base with proper drainage grading around the perimeter, which keeps splashback and standing water away from the lowest, most vulnerable part of the structure. Depending on chassis configuration and finish level, turnkey pricing on their park models generally land somewhere between $65,000 and $110,000, making this one of the more accessible entries on the list for the level of build quality you get. If you need more square footage without more roof surface exposed to rain, Tiny Mountain Houses builds ANSI, a 119.2 and a 119.5 compliant tiny homes on wheels with multi-loft layouts designed for families or long-term rental use. More usable space inside the same rain-resistant envelope is a smart trade in this climate, since every additional roofline, dormer, or valley you add is another seam where water can eventually find a way in. Their builds are engineered specifically for long-term, year-round occupancy rather than just weekend or seasonal use, which in Seattle means the insulation and moisture barriers have to perform in November just as well as they do in July. And that distinction actually matters a lot more here than it does almost anywhere else in the country. Now here is the one I teased at the top. Big Bliss Tiny Homes builds smaller, flexible layouts designed for ADUs, guest units, and off-grid setups. And the detail that sets them apart is a continuous mechanical ventilation strategy paired with a genuinely sealed, insulated envelope. Here is the actual trick. Most people assume the fix for a damp climate is just piling on more insulation and calling it done. But insulation without controlled airflow just traps humidity inside the walls where you cannot see it, which is how mold starts in year 2, without a single leak ever happening. The builders who get this right run a whole home mechanical ventilation system, often an HRV or an ERV, that constantly cycles air in and out, so moisture never has a chance to sit still and soak into the framing. It is quiet, it is invisible once installed, and it is the actual difference between a tiny home that ages gracefully in Seattle and one that needs the subfloor replaced before its 5th birthday. If you remember one single sentence from this entire video, remember that one. Tiny Heirloom designs luxury tiny homes specifically engineered around heavy rainfall, colder temperatures, and variable Pacific Northwest terrain. Their approach centers on moisture control, insulation, and smart ventilation working together rather than any single fix carrying the whole load. Design-wise, they lean into dark steel window framing paired with a moisture-resistant envelope, drawing on the moss-covered forest aesthetic of places like Olympia. It is a look that photographs beautifully and happens to be extremely low maintenance in a wet climate, since steel framing does not warp, swell, or rot the way an all-wood frame eventually will after enough wet winters. Every tiny home on wheels is only as good as what it sits on, and Eagle Trailers out of Portland is one of the leading manufacturers of heavy-duty trailers across the entire Pacific Northwest. This one is less about the visible design and more about the invisible engineering underneath it. Corrosion-resistant galvanized steel chassis rated to handle months of standing moisture and constant road spray. A gorgeous tiny house sitting on a trailer that rusts out after 5 wet Northwest winters is not actually a good investment, So builders across this whole list rely on trailer manufacturers like this one to get the unglamorous, load-bearing foundation right before a single wall ever goes up. We are closing with a style rather than a single builder because it shows up across nearly every serious Washington builder on this list, and it is worth understanding on its own. It is called Pacific Modern, and it is basically the regional architectural answer to this exact climate problem. Deep roof overhangs that extend well past the walls to keep wind-driven rain off the siding and windows. Standing seam metal roofing and metal accents that shrug off moss and moisture in a way cedar shakes never could. Expansive glass positioned to pull in every available minute of light during the gray months. It is not just a look, it is a direct architectural response to building in a place that gets rain on nearly 40% of the days in a year. And once you notice it, you will spot it on tiny homes and full-sized homes all over Western Washington. So that is 10 tiny homes actually built to survive Seattle's climate instead of just looking good in a dry state photo shoot. If you take one thing away from this video, let be this. In a market this wet roof pitch, rain screens, and mechanical ventilation are not upgrades. They are the entire difference between a home that lasts 30 years and one that needs to be gutted in 3. Washington's own residential code, which incorporates IRC Appendix AQ, sets the 400 square foot ceiling for tiny homes on a foundation and mandates strict envelope, ceiling, and ventilation standards as a baseline. But everything we covered today, the HRVs, the rain screens, the standing seam roofs, that is builders going well beyond code because they actually understand what this climate does to a poorly built home over time. If this saved you from making an expensive mistake, do me a favor and subscribe, because next week I'm breaking down the exact permitting process for placing one of these on a residential lot inside Seattle city limits. And trust me, that video is going to save you even more headaches than this one did. Drop a comment and tell me which of these 10 was your favorite. I will see you in the next one.